The property line. Part 1. The letter. The first sign that something was wrong arrived in a plain white envelope. Years later, Daniel Mercer would remember every detail of that morning. The smell of coffee, the sound of rain tapping against the kitchen windows, the old clock ticking above the refrigerator. At the time, it felt like an ordinary Tuesday. The kind of day people forget. The kind of day that doesn't seem important until everything changes. Daniel lived alone on 40 acres of land just outside the small town of Millfield. The property had been his pride and joy for nearly 7 years. He wasn't rich. He wasn't a businessman. He owned a landscaping company with 3 employees and worked harder than anyone he knew. Every improvement on the property had come from years of effort. The farmhouse roof? Daniel installed it himself. The restored barn? 3 summers of labor. The fencing? Built board by board. The fruit orchard? Planted 1 tree at a time. The land wasn't simply something he owned. It was his life's work, which was why the envelope made no sense. The return address belonged to a law firm in the city. At first he assumed it was junk mail. Then he noticed the words, "Certified legal notice." A strange feeling settled in his stomach. Daniel opened it. By the second paragraph, his coffee had gone cold. According to the document, a neighboring landowner named Victor Kane was claiming ownership of approximately 18 acres of Daniel's property. Daniel laughed. Actually laughed. The claim was absurd. 18 acres wasn't a small mistake. It wasn't a fence being a few feet off. It wasn't confusion over a property corner. It was nearly half his land. The notice included a survey map. Daniel spread it across the table. His smile disappeared. The property lines had changed. The western boundary now cut directly through land he had occupied for years. The new line included his barn, his pasture, part of his orchard. Even worse, it included the gravel access road leading to his home. Without that road, reaching the property would become nearly impossible. Daniel stared at the map. Something felt wrong. Not mistaken. Wrong. The difference was important. Mistakes happened. This felt deliberate. He immediately called the law firm. After 20 minutes on hold, a receptionist answered. "I'm calling about a property dispute," Daniel said. "1 moment." Several transfers later, he finally reached an attorney. The man sounded bored. "Mr. Mercer, our client has submitted updated survey documentation indicating ownership of the disputed acreage." "Updated from what?" "The previous records." "What previous records?" "I'm afraid I don't have those in front of me." Daniel gripped the phone tighter. "I bought this property 7 years ago. I have surveys. I have tax records. I'm simply informing you of our client's position." Our client's position. The phrase irritated him, as though ownership were a matter of opinion. The attorney continued. "Mr. Kane would prefer to resolve the matter without litigation." Daniel frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means he hopes you will cooperate." The line went silent. For some reason, those words bothered Daniel more than anything else. Not cooperate. Not discuss. Not negotiate. Cooperate. As though a decision had already been made. Daniel hung up. Then he drove straight to the county records office. The building sat near the courthouse in the center of Millfield. It looked ancient. Inside, rows of filing cabinets stretched across multiple rooms. A clerk named Susan greeted him. Daniel explained the situation. She listened carefully. "Let's take a look." At first she seemed confident, then confused, then concerned. The original survey wasn't where it should have been. Neither were several related documents. Susan searched again, then again. An hour passed. Nothing. Daniel watched her expression change. "That's impossible," she finally said. "What is?" "The original filings." "What about them?" "They aren't here." Daniel felt a chill. "What do you mean they aren't here?" "I mean they're gone." Records didn't simply disappear. Every property document was backed up, logged, stored, tracked, especially documents involving land ownership. Yet somehow the records supporting Daniel's property boundaries were missing. The only survey remaining in the system was the newer version. the one favoring Victor Kane. Daniel drove home feeling sick. For the first time, he wondered if this was bigger than a misunderstanding. When he arrived, he noticed tire tracks near the entrance gate. Fresh tire tracks. His property sat nearly a quarter-mile from the nearest road. Nobody accidentally drove up there. The tracks hadn't been there that morning. Daniel followed them. They led toward the western section of the property, toward the disputed land. Eventually they disappeared near the tree line. He found nothing else. No vehicle, no people, just tracks. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been there, watching, measuring, planning. That night, sleep refused to come. Around midnight he gave up and walked outside. The rain had stopped. Fog drifted across the fields. The property looked different in the darkness. Larger, lonelier. Daniel stood on the porch listening to the silence. Then he noticed headlights. Far away, near the western pasture, a vehicle sat motionless. Its lights disappeared. For several seconds everything went dark. Then the engine started. The vehicle sped away. Daniel immediately jumped into his truck. He followed. The chase lasted less than 3 minutes. The vehicle vanished onto a back road and disappeared. Daniel never got close enough to identify the driver. But he did notice one thing. The truck was black. Much worse. Orange survey flags covered part of his property. Dozens of them. They stretched across fields Daniel had maintained for years. Someone had placed them overnight. Daniel ripped one from the ground. Then another. Then another. As he reached the fourth marker, he saw a folded piece of paper attached to the stake. His stomach tightened. The note contained only a single sentence. "You should have sold when you had the chance." Daniel read it twice, then a third time. The message made no sense. Nobody had approached him about selling. Nobody had made an offer. Nobody had even asked. Yet whoever left the note seemed convinced otherwise. That afternoon Daniel visited several longtime residents of Millfield. One conversation changed everything. An elderly farmer named Walter Green had lived in the area for nearly 60 years. If anyone knew local history, it was Walter. Daniel showed him the survey. Walter studied it quietly. Then his face darkened. "Where'd you get this?" "It was filed last month." Walter shook his head. "That's not right." "What isn't?" Walter pointed at the western section. "This land has always belonged to your property." "You sure?" Walter laughed. "Son, I helped repair the fence line back in 1998. I've walked those boundaries more times than I can count." Daniel felt a small sense of relief, until Walter spoke again. "You said Victor Kane filed this?" "Yeah." Walter became silent. The old farmer looked toward the window, almost nervous. Daniel noticed immediately. "What?" Walter hesitated. "I don't know if I'd get involved." "Why?" The old man lowered his voice. "Because strange things seem to happen around people who fight Victor Kane." Daniel stared at him. "What does that mean?" Walter didn't answer right away. Instead, he stood and locked the front door. The action sent a chill through Daniel. Finally, Walter turned back. 3 years ago, a rancher named Bill Hawkins challenged one of Kane's land claims. "What happened?" Walter swallowed. "Bill withdrew the lawsuit." "Why?" "He never said." And then, Walter's expression hardened. 2 months later his barn burned down. The room suddenly felt colder. "Are you saying Kane did it?" "I'm saying nobody could prove who did." Daniel left shortly afterward. The drive home felt longer than usual. His thoughts raced. Missing records. Unknown vehicles. Survey flags. Threatening notes. Stories about Victor Kane. Individually, each piece could be explained. Together, they painted a different picture. Someone wanted his land. Badly. And they had been working toward that goal long before he received the letter. The sun was setting when Daniel reached his driveway. At first everything looked normal. Then he noticed something hanging from the gate. A wooden sign, freshly nailed into place. Large black letters covered the front. Daniel walked closer. His pulse quickened. The sign read, "Private property of Victor Kane." For several seconds, he simply stared. Then anger replaced fear. He ripped the sign down, snapped it in half, threw the pieces into the dirt. As he turned toward the house, movement caught his eye. Someone was standing near the tree line, watching him, a tall figure, motionless, too far away to identify. Daniel took a step forward. The figure stepped backward into the woods and vanished, leaving Daniel completely alone. For the first time since receiving the letter, he realized something terrifying. This wasn't the beginning of a legal dispute. It was the final stage of a plan that had already been set in motion, and whoever was behind it had no intention of stopping.